The Golden Years.
Good evening. This is Jack McDonald welcoming you once again to the Golden Years. Tonight, as we look back through the Golden Years, our attention is once again focused on the famous Roi Mine, this time on the episode of the $1 Million Cheque. With the decrease in purchasing power of the dollar over the years, $1 million does not seem to be a particularly significant sum in the business world of today. 3/4 of a century ago, it was an enormous sum. Few people have the privilege of seeing, let alone writing, a $1 million cheque. Rossland's $1 million cheque was written on the 27th of August, 1898, and was drawn on the Rossland branch of the Bank of Montreal. It was signed by the Honorable Charles McIntosh, who was the past Lieutenant Governor of the Northwest Territories. He signed on behalf of Whittaker Wright's British America Corporation as the final payment in the purchase of the Roi Mine from its American owners by the British America Corporation. The Roi had initially been acquired by Colonel Topping of Nelson for the sum of $12.50 in return for putting up the recording fees on the first 5 claims staked on Rossland's Red Mountain. Topping quickly disposed of his claim for $30,000 to a syndicate of Spokane investors. The Spokane group strained their financial resources to the limit, and at one stage had to sacrifice shares at a very low price to raise working capital. But after 4 years of dogged determination, they developed a very rich mine. The syndicate then sold the Roi to the British America Corporation for the sum of $3 million. The sale of the mine, however, was not a simple transaction. Instead, it embroiled the Roi in a famous international litigation that at times took on the aspect of a cloak and dagger comedy. The case involved participants of 3 nations and dragged on for 3 years, then was terminated with the signing of the $1 million cheque. Here, then, is the story of the $1 million cheque.
The first rift among the directors of the Leroy occurred when a Chicago company offered to buy the mine for $500,000. Disagreement on the future of the property was immediately evident. The debate that resulted ended in the resignation of George Forster as president and the purchase by the company of 52,000 of his shares at $1 a share. Colonel W. Turner was then appointed president. The completion of the Trail smelter and the railway in 1896 required that production be stepped up. John Manahan was made superintendent, and the property was developed at a greater depth, showing that valuable ore lay below. The mine now began to pay dividends at the rate of $25,000 a year. At the same time, a considerable sum had been spent on new machinery and mining equipment. A change in the board during 1897 made George Turner general manager with offices in Spokane. W.J. Harris was manager at the mine, and Colonel Ridpath, whose name is perpetuated in the Ridpath Hotel in Spokane, represented the company at the Trail smelter. By this time, dividends of $25,000 a month were being constantly maintained, and the company entered the new year of 1897 with high hopes for the future.
The winds of rumor first began to blow in February of 1897 when Judge Turner, upon being pressed, admitted the company was willing to sell but would consider nothing less than $5 million. Well disguised but disquieting nevertheless, a split began to show among the directors again. The brothers Turner on the one side and the brothers Peyton on the other, each with a following, began to disagree on the value of their bonanza. The only unanimous opinion was that they should sell. In an endeavor to place their property in the best market, Judge Turner and Colonel Peyton, representing respectively the 2 split factions, departed for London, where interest had grown with regard to British Columbia mines.
Meanwhile, there was also dissatisfaction at the manner in which their ore was being handled at the Trail smelter. Some of the directors spoke of building their own. James Breen, who was still associated with Heinze at Trail, went to Northport with W.J. Harris and chose a site for the new plant. Herman Bellinger, manager of Heinze's Trail smelter, was also approached by the Leroy Company, with the result that both he and Breen deserted Heinze and joined forces to build the new Leroy operation at Northport. The project was completed in October 1897, and the Leroy Company began smelting its own ores. Meanwhile, to the Rossland camp came the distinguished figure of the Honorable Charles McIntosh, Lieutenant Governor of the Northwest Territories, who was on the verge of retiring from that position. McIntosh had just returned from a visit to London, where he had met an old school chum, Whittaker Wright, who was flying high in the financial world with his London and Globe Finance Company. McIntosh had persuaded Wright to form the British America Corporation, with McIntosh as managing director. Its purpose was to invest in British Columbia and Alaska mining properties. On his return to Rossland, McIntosh purchased the Josie, Great Western, Columbia and Kootenai, Pullman, Nickel Plate, and West Leroy for the British concern.
In London, Colonel Peyton negotiated with the British America Corporation for the sale of the Leroy for $3 million, with the final details to be completed in Spokane with other directors and McIntosh. Turner, on the other hand, had tried to obtain $5 million, but was unsuccessful, and the arrangement negotiated by Peyton was headed for trouble from the start. The first directors' meeting in Spokane, called to consider the Peyton deal, adjourned on a technicality. The Turner faction needed time to plan its campaign. Peyton disposed of his shares to the British America Corporation at $6 a share. The Turner faction, representing the minority shareholders, refused to surrender its shares at that price, and the meeting was again deadlocked. The battle now resolved itself around the interpretation of British and American law. The British America Corporation held the view that, as majority shareholder, it should have the right to conduct the business of the mine. The minority group insisted that the company was registered in Washington under U.S. laws and that they were unaffected by British law. Their position was strengthened by the laws of Washington state, which said no alien could hold property within the state. This gave the minority group control over the Northport smelter and the company offices in Spokane, and effectively prevented the majority shareholders from taking control of the company's business.
The next week witnessed hectic events in the company's history. Determined if possible to keep the battle within the jurisdiction of the U.S. courts, the minority group obtained an injunction restraining Colonel Peyton from making legal the sale of the company's shares. Before it could be acted upon, however, L.F. Williams hastily gathered the documents and paraphernalia together, hired a special train, and fled to Rossland. Upon his arrival, to his consternation, he found that, in place of the Leroy seal, he was in possession of the seal of another company. In Spokane, Bill Harris had anticipated the move that Williams was about to make, had substituted another seal, and with a certain amount of grim humor had watched Williams, in a hurry, take the seal from its customary place in the Spokane office without examining it. A pawn in the game to the minority group, the seal was a necessary instrument in the completion of any company transaction.
When the defiance of the injunction by Williams came to the ears of Turner and Ridpath, they resolved that no repetition of this escape would be made by the rest of the Peyton group. They immediately hired deputies to enforce the order of the court. McIntosh, having set his heart on putting the deal through, decided to employ similar tactics by taking things into his own hands. Aware that the deputies had gathered in force just outside Spokane with orders to stop all trains to the Canadian border, McIntosh hired a special locomotive and, putting 3 of the most important shareholders into the cab, gave the engineer strict orders to stop at nothing. His orders were explicitly obeyed, and the deputies, prepared for a little trouble, were helpless to cope with a speeding express locomotive and perforce allowed their quarry to escape. That McIntosh was a man of many parts became evident when his own private car containing the rest of the majority group was entered by Deputy Sheriff Bunce. With great dignity and extreme patience, he explained to the deputy the sanctity of an Englishman's home, whether it be train, car, or castle, the breach of etiquette committed when he attempted a forcible entrance, and concluded by a gentle request that the deputy move his person elsewhere. Bunce, a man of action and not schooled in the use of parliamentary language, thereupon retired to the platform, feeling discomfited and slightly dazed. Before long, however, the idea came to him that trainmen were not in quite the same category as company directors, so he pulled a gun and held the train crew powerless in any attempt to move the train. This impasse was broken only by the arrival of Austin Corbin, the president of the railroad, who gave explicit orders that the train be allowed to proceed. Persistently clinging to his duty and to the side of the train, the hapless deputy was obliged to ride the 140 miles to the border in the heat and dust of a summer's day, not in any way encouraged by the sounds of merriment that came from inside the private coach. On arrival at Northport, he was strongly advised to go no further, as he would surely be arrested for carrying a deadly weapon into Canada. The advice was acted upon, and the majority group passed unmolested into Canadian territory.
The fight now being transferred to Rossland, it became necessary for Turner and his followers to engage in battle there. No time was lost in reaching the scene of action. A meeting was held on July 3, 1898, with the legal talent of both sides well represented. But adjournment followed adjournment, as no settlement or compromise could be reached. Judge Turner ultimately won a point, and the $500,000 preliminary payment was returned to the British America Corporation. The corporation, however, was a power not to be trifled with, and the outcome was a stalemate. The next clash came later that month in Spokane. Colonel Peyton, by reason of disposing of his interests, resigned. A move to induce the president, Colonel Turner, to put a motion to the meeting appointing the chief engineer, W.A. Carlisle, to the board was refused point blank. The meeting then adjourned without any business being transacted.
Angered at the continued delays, McIntosh applied to Judge Spinks of the county court for an order placing the Roi Mine into receivership. This was granted, and Carlisle was appointed by the court to act as receiver. Carlisle's first action was to curtail production of the mine to a minimum. Bill Harris, whom he superseded, had been shipping 350 tons a day to the Northport smelter in an endeavor to get as much ore as possible out of Canadian jurisdiction. The explanation given by the BA Corporation was that Harris had been gutting the mine and retarding successful development.
Feelings that had been under control now seemed to break all bounds, and the fight became both bitter and unrestrained. Physical violence was narrowly averted when Judge Turner, now a senator, and Colonel Peyton met in the Allen Hotel. The senator was with great difficulty restrained from throwing Peyton bodily out of the building. Meanwhile, action was started in the Spokane courts by the Turner brothers against Peyton and the British America Corporation for alleged conspiracy in the sale of Leroy's shares. The setback given the minority group by the receivership was only temporary, and they were successful at Victoria in having the receivership set aside. The minority group once more moved in, and Billy Harris was again put in charge of the mine and quickly resumed his tactics of shipping as much ore as possible to the Northport smelter. Men were reinstated, and the mine hummed with activity. The British America Corporation was given 10 days in which to prepare an appeal. 3 days before the scheduled sitting of the court, the lawyers for the BA Corporation were invited to the Allen Hotel as guests of the sympathizers of the minority group. The hosts proved so congenial that the lawyers were reluctant to leave, and when the realization finally came that they were in a legal battle, it was too late to appear in court. The BA Corporation had already spent $35,000 on legal actions, and the forgetfulness of the attorneys was probably welcome. As quickly as they had broken out, hostilities now appeared to die down. Both sides seemed content to let matters take their own course and devoted their efforts to keeping the peace. It was not until October that the silence was broken. McIntosh was non-committal, but his remarks inferred that the ball had started to roll again. With an unexpectedness that was startling, the climax to the long drawn-out fight was reached. In contrast to the fast action that had characterized the proceedings on other occasions, the finish, although swift, was tame and devoid of drama. Spokane provided the setting. Deeds of agreement were drawn up and signed on November 22, 1898. The mine was sold for $3 million, and a check for $1,042,054, signed by C.H. McIntosh, was written on the Bank of Montreal, Rossland, as final payment. The only spectacular event on record was provided by the colorful Bill Harris. Informed at the last moment of the transaction, he continued a policy that was so popular with members of the company and hired a special train to take him to Spokane to sign the papers.
In concluding this deal, the last of the original company relinquished all claim and title to a property that had been developed from an unproved hole in the ground into the world's richest gold mine. Within a span of 8 short years, Out of what had been a perilous undertaking on a restricted amount of capital, there developed a fabulous mine that richly rewarded its pioneers. The minority group surrendered their shares at $7.40 per share, and in addition received payment for ore en route and mat within the Northport smelter. Added to the sum realized from its sale, the Leroy had also paid over $900,000 in dividends to the shareholders. Fully reimbursed for the labor and troubles of their ownership, the majority of the original group retired to Spokane.
And there we have the exciting story of the $1 million check. A photostat of this check and the documents of sale to the British America Corporation are on file in the archives of the Rossland Museum, along with many other documents of the Roi Mine. Taking part in tonight's narration were Craig Weir and Jack Fisher. Listen in again next week at the same time when we'll look back through the golden years at the famous old Rossland Club. Now, this is Jack McDonald on behalf of the Rossland Centennial Committee bidding you good night.
This program is produced by Radio 610 with the cooperation of the Rossland Centennial Committee and the citizens of the friendly Golden City.